So again, one of the issues that we think about when we talk about social entrepreneurship is, okay, we've established this organization that, again, we're prioritizing social demands, but at the same time, obviously there's this economic need for sustainability to continue the organization. And once an organization has kind of taken off, they've managed to survive for a short amount of time, they've been relatively successful. An issue that they face is, how do they increase the impact of what they're doing, right? So this is what you call scaling impact, right? Scaling social impact. So there's been a lot of work related to that, and including some work that I've done. And traditionally, when we think about, okay, scaling impact, so if you take a more traditional enterprise, you're doing well, you have sales, you have customers, you have people who are buying your product, you can go to some investors, so let's say angel investors, venture capitalists, family, friends, right, depending on the stage of development, and you can get funding for continuing your operations, right? So the more successful you are, the more money you can try to get, say. So the more results that you should. This isn't always the case in the social enterprise field, because again, often social enterprises are serving maybe relatively marginal populations, or maybe not very profitable areas. It depends on the kinds of business that you're doing. So how do you increase the impact of your activity? So one option is, the traditional option is, you grow organically, right? So you start doing XYZ things, and then you add something else, right? And you have 3 stores, you add a 4th store, and you need some capital again, so you get that somehow. So that's the organic growth. You keep it within the organization. The problem with that is, again, as we just discussed, it's the availability of resources, the availability of financing for that kind of growth is often not readily apparent for a lot of social enterprises, right? So another option, say, and this we've seen that for a long time in the field of non-governmental organizations, so NGOs, nonprofits, many of which, again, are taking social enterprise forms now, or hybrid organizational forms, so they add some kind of earned revenue component. What they've traditionally done is, they've done something well. Let's say they were successful in a local area. I don't know. Let's say they were delivering water, let's say, to villages that were underserved. Let's say we're in India or Latin America, Africa, somewhere. So they've done that successfully. So maybe they take their way of delivering water or getting water to kind of marginalized rural populations, and they codify it. So they take that and they make what you call a set of best practices or blueprint that other organizations can copy and they can use, and then they kind of create that, and then they share it. They go to meetings, they go to, let's say, the UN, they go to a larger NGO or organization like, say, Save the Children, an organization like that, and then the idea can get spread around. So that's the advantage of that kind of scaling, increasing impact, is that it doesn't really cost much, right? So you've done something relatively successfully, and now you've shared it, and again, there's a cost in creating the blueprint, etc. But then it's really about spreading the information, again, now with the availability of internet everywhere, communication technologies, email. This is much easier. But there's a downside to that, right? So the downside to doing this is, once you codify it and you spread the innovation, you have no control over how it will be implemented, right? So you may do it in a certain way, you may have a certain belief about how a particular activity should be done. And again, and this is important in the social enterprise field because for a lot of social enterprises, there's this tremendous aspect of values. We do something for the betterment of humanity, and we do it for a particular reason. We don't necessarily do it for financial gain, although that may be part of it, right? So there's this values component that can get lost if we just take our innovation, take our way of doing things and just spread it into the ether, so to speak, even though that's low cost. And again, and another downside is that, let's say you create some way of doing something and someone else appropriates it, they take it and they implement it, but in a different way, and maybe there's some negative impact that happens as a result of that. That can come back to you, right? So just an example, and it's quite a debate in the microfinance field. So I had spoken earlier about microcredit. So for instance, when the Grameen Bank model was developed, it was a very explicitly social model, right, of doing microcredit. So again, there was a relatively high interest rate, but the idea was the money went back to the shareholders were the people that were being lent to, right? That was the idea of the Grameen Bank. Now, when that idea of microcredit started to spread, really, again, Grameen Bank wasn't the first to do it, but they're really the most well known. It started to go to many other parts of the world where the form it took was quite different. So, for instance, in the 90s, there was a bank in Mexico, Comportamos. They started out in a nonprofit form. There was a huge financial crisis in Mexico. They took a for-profit form. And then, again, they were still a social enterprise, or they were considered by many people to be a social enterprise, but they increased their interest rates to a very high level, so around 80% on an annual basis. Those were loans that they were making. So they recouped their costs, and in the end, what they decided to do is they decided to go and get large. They just to increase their scale. So they had an initial public offering, an IPO, on the Mexican stock market. They raised millions of dollars, but then as a result of that, their primary stakeholders, or one of their primary stakeholders, became the shareholders, right? They had to pay dividends to the shareholders. Shareholders expected the stock price to go up. So then people said, well, is this really what we want to do with microcredit, right? Do we want to do this in the service of shareholders? Are we not doing something that's not the original intention by charging 80% to poor people, like 80% interest to poor people to pay shareholders, right? So that this became a very big debate within the microcredit field, and Muhammad Yunus and the Grameen Bank, they were against that way of doing business. For instance, they said that was too high. It shouldn't be for business in that way, right? So they had this social business concept. So I just used that example just to highlight. And again, what Comportamos said in return is that they said, well, yes, it's true that we charge more interest, but this is by charging more interest and by having access to capital from capital markets, we can reach far more people. We can serve more people than a model which didn't have that access, right? So it was this debate, like, well, so should we keep this relatively smaller organization with less access to capital markets, or should we access capital markets, serve more people, but then does the social mission actually get compromised in that way, right? And that's the big debate, and I think that's a debate that's ongoing in the field. So I only highlight that just to say, once you start spreading the innovation by diffusion, when other people start picking up your idea, if you're a successful social enterprise, you don't know how it'll be implemented, and the way it's implemented can have a negative impact back on you as the organization that's originated the social enterprise. So in my research, what I've looked at is something intermediate between these two forms, right? So this kind of organic growth and this diffusion. I look at partnerships between social enterprises, right? So within the social entrepreneurship field. So I did some field research mainly in on the Indian subcontinent, but also in Latin America, but all in the developing world, we call emerging markets. And I looked at how organizations use partnerships with other social enterprises, so one-to-one partnerships, as a way to increase their impact, as a way to spread their innovations, but also by having that partnership, they also maintain some degree of control over how that enterprise, that innovation is actually spread, right? So if you're coordinating with another organization and you have, let's say, site visits, constant communication, sharing of best practices in a more direct manner, not indirect, say through the sharing of best practices through blueprints, etc., you may actually have greater control over how the innovation is spread, and you may be able to better inject this idea of values, right? The values that underlie the innovation that's being transferred. So just one example of an organization that I looked at was a very well-known Indian social enterprise in the south of India. It's the Arvind Eye Hospital. It's located in a city called Madurai. That's the headquarters in southern India, in Tamil Nadu. They're very, very well known, and they have a system. They have basically a way of doing eye care, so cataract surgeries in particular, but also glasses and things like that. So they're the most productive eye hospital system in the world. They do, and they have a very particular model. They do social marketing, for instance, to bring in villagers or people who wouldn't normally think about getting eye care because it's too expensive, etc. So they go. When I was with them, I did a good amount of field work with them. I went out to one of their eye camps, and they go to a village. It's announced long in advance. Everyone from the village comes, or a lot of people from the village come. They get tests, and their vision is tested. And if people need glasses, they're helped with glasses on site. If they need something more serious, like a cataract surgery, the Arvind Eye Hospital, they'll provide transportation for a lot of these very poor villagers to go back to the base hospital in Madurai to get that eye care, and then once they're in the hospital, they're kept, they're housed, they're given food, they get their surgery, and then they're sent back. And again, often these are non-paying customers, and along with this kind of social marketing, helping disadvantaged populations, there's a huge paying section there. There's a paying section, and a lot of people come to Arvind to get eye care because they specialize in cataract surgery and eye care. So there are a huge number of paying customers who come from all over India, all over the world, really, because it's a renowned eye institute. And so those people pay. They pay, up to X amount. They're still relatively cheap compared to U.S. healthcare, for instance, but more than say normal Indian hospital, but very high level care, and then so and the only difference between the two sets of customers is the two sets of patients, we want to say, in this eye hospital is the paying customers, maybe they'll have their own room or they'll share a room with one other patient. For the free customers, they might for the section that's where Arvind is donating the service, maybe the rooms will have more beds or something, but the care is the same. The same kind of care is taken with the patients. So they have a system for doing this eye care, and they partnered. So what I saw when I was there is they partnered with another hospital in India that it was in the state of West Bengal. And they had a very, very long-term collaboration to kind of share their system, and that system was almost reproduced there in this other eye hospital. I also looked at a collaboration they had with the eye hospital in Paraguay in South America, and I visited that system. And again, it was, even though they were thousands of miles apart, language was totally different. They still were able to really help this eye hospital create or recreate parts of the Aravind system, right? The system of eye care. And again, a lot of that was related to the values that these organizations share. So all of these are relatively spiritual organizations, you'd call it. They're based in some religious principles, etc. So the Eye Hospital in Paraguay is a Christian organization, Aravind Eye Hospital. In fact, the name Aravind comes from Sri Aurobindo, who's one of the great gurus, the Hindu sages of in South India. He founded an ashram in Pondicherry, and the founder of the Aravind Eye Hospital actually was greatly influenced by this gentleman, and he actually named the hospital system after Sri Aurobindo, and that kind of spirituality you find all throughout the hospital system. So again, there the coordination was possibly facilitated by the values that these organizations shared, right? So that's another component that comes in with social enterprise that we may not see in other kinds of more traditional entrepreneurship.